Hey everybody, Serivich here, hoping that you are having a magnificent October 17th. Now, ever since I've watched my first top 10 video game related list, I've wanted to do one of my own, and what better way to start things off than with the list of my top 10 favorite games of all time. Now, bear in mind that the videos on this list are solely my opinion, so if one game is rated above another, just remember, it's my opinion. It's from my experience with the game, and not based off of some false internet bias. So, that being said, let's get started. I love the Super Nintendo. It was the first console I ever had in my home as a kid, and the one that I find myself coming back to time and time again. And that's the console where number 10 finds itself. UN Squadron may seem like your run-of-the-mill side-scrolling flying shooter, but past the box art, it's much, much more. This was the first game I ever played that gave you a choice as to who you wanted to play as. This was amazing to me as a kid. Being the little brother, I finally got a say. No more being thrown the second controller and being forced to be Luigi. I don't even like green, and I'm pretty sure that was why. You had 3 characters to choose from, each with their own style of play. There was Mickey, Greg, and Shin. I know Mickey and Greg were men, but what in the hell was Shin? You know what? Shin's a woman. End of story. I don't care what any wiki, game facts, or this guy says. After the first mission, you even got to choose which mission you wanted to do next. Holy shit! That absolutely blew my mind as a kid. Music in the game fits perfectly with all the levels and is nothing short of amazing. I'd even go as far as to say that it has the best overall music experience of any game on the Super Nintendo. Each boss was spectacular in its own way, requiring different strategies, although some were disappointingly easy. A lot of you may be wondering why this game isn't higher up on the list, seeing as how it's such a big icon in the first-person shooter genre, but it's mainly attributed to the experience that I ended up having with it. Half-Life is the most fun FPS game that I've ever played, but I had the worst time playing it on my computer. When I purchased the game off of Steam, I was more excited than a 12-year-old seeing breasts for the first time. Then the breasts just sort of deflated after crashing and crashing and crashing. Pinned down by soldiers with only one grenade and a scarce amount of MP5 rounds? No problem. Just lob that grenade and happy times will ensue. Except the game will freeze your computer and you'll hear the same explosion noise until you do a hard reboot. Or put a gun to your own head. I didn't own a gun when I was 16, so I just settled for the former. Haven't saved your game recently? Then that's too bad for you. That isn't to say that I gave up on the game, though. On the contrary, I enjoyed it so much that I completed the game, even with this limitation. You didn't have just one enemy. You had so many things that wanted you dead that every life form was a potential threat. Even the friendlies, because they move so slow that you hit the age of 70 before completing the game. Anybody that knows me would have their reality shattered if a Castlevania game wasn't somewhere on this list. Castlevania Circle of the Moon is my favorite Castlevania game for the Game Boy Advance, and in my opinion, it's the hardest and most underrated of the platform. Unlike Aria of Sorrow or Harmony of Dissonance, it didn't hold your hand and just give you things to make the game easier. If you wanted an accessory upgrade or a new power, you had to kill enemies to find it. Low on health after that difficult boss fight? Hope you can make it back to the save point without too many problems. Need potions? Better be prepared to do some farming. Not only did you have to play like this during your first playthrough of the game, you had to do it through all the game modes. There wasn't just like the generic easy, normal, and hard modes. No, you had normal, fighter, magician, shooter, and thief, each with their own specialties and challenges to face. Then under each of those was a surprisingly good card system. The fighter was the exception to this since it couldn't use the cards. There was just so much to do in the game, and playing each game mode was a different experience each time. This game would have ranked higher on this list, but the difficulty factor did turn me off from it when I first played the game. But now I recognize it for the gem that it is. This is more of a recent favorite for me, but it sticks out amongst most of the games that I've ever played, so I had to find room for it on this list. Hagane is another side-scrolling masterpiece for the Super Nintendo. Never heard of it? That's alright, I hadn't either until I dug deeper into the internet to find legitimately hard games to play for one of my live streams. After some 2 full minutes of research, I learned that Hagane was only available at Blockbuster for North America. I have never set foot in a Blockbuster before. I've always been the wait for it to come out on 7-channel TV kind of guy. Maybe my extra dollar would have saved Blockbuster. I'm a terrible, terrible human being. Rather than relying on cheap traps, bad controls, or just bad level design in general, okay, mostly, Pagane made you aware of the fact that if you died, it was your fault. It's a game that you could potentially beat in one newbie run, sort of, but chances are that you won't, and when you do manage to beat it and get through the ending credits, you get to experience the whole thing again on an even harder difficulty. Those things alone landed this game right here on this list. Aside from that, you could pretty much compare the gameplay to that of the first 3 Ninja Gaiden games. There are so many gun-wielding, item-using, puzzle-solving badasses in gaming that picking one to go on a favorites list can seem nearly impossible. But this one stands out to me as an underrated Super Nintendo legend who deserved a sequel, even if his name doesn't exactly make me think of a hero. Kyle, aka Blackthorn, just gonna use Blackthorn for this case, has a gun and doesn't care what gets murdered by it. Enemies, no problem. Wasps, pew pew, you're dead. Generators, I got this floaty gun. Friends, I'll roll them all someday anyway. Guys with whips, better go for a bomb on this one. Blackthorn has a little something for everybody. Platforming, items, puzzle elements, backtracking, guns, combat, monsters, betrayal by friends, betrayal by you, guns, and a boss battle that is well worth the wait, if not a little short. But to be fair, the game can be completed in a couple of hours. I know, this isn't technically one game, but it came on one disc, and if it wasn't for this, we'd have another Castlevania game on this list. The Orange Box, or at least the one that I had 5 games on it, 4 of which I played the hell out of, and one that I never got to try, Team Fortress 2 for anyone that's wondering. Half-Life 2, Half-Life 2 Episode 1, and Half-Life 2 Episode 2 were definitely titles worthy of being successors of the original Half-Life. There isn't much that I can say about these games that hasn't already been said, other than hurry up and come out with Episode 3, you cock-teasing masters of torture! That out of the way, I'll talk about the game on the disc that helped the Orange Box land higher up on this list. Portal. I have yet to hear of a game that beats or even matches Portal in its puzzles, wit, humor, or lovability. Speaking of wit, humor, and lovability, this game has those in a different way. When I first bought Nier for my Xbox 360, I wasn't sure what I was getting aside from a cheap game with nice box art. The story unfolded with a middle-aged man fending off legions of enemies using magic from a book at his side. Later we learned that he was defending Yona, his daughter, from these hellish beasts. This is where things got trippy as hell. The game skips to about 1300 years later. 1300? Really? What the fuck was Kaguya thinking? Okay, botched up timeline aside, the rest of the story is actually pretty enjoyable. I won't spoil any more from here, but I will tell you about my favorite features. For one, all of the main characters were fully developed to the point where you could picture them being in the real world. Nier, aka you in this situation, isn't just fighting because he was told to. He's fighting to find a cure for his daughter. I've played a lot of games in my day, and this story element is rare. It's usually some characterless lover that you couldn't give 2 shits about, but this gives you a sense of urgency. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Lords of Shadow. During the game, you come to a point where you think the game is going to end, and it is just a heart-wrenching moment. It was sadder than when Sephiroth killed Aerith in Final Fantasy VII. I'm not going to spoil it, but the point after that is also an amazing feature they included. There are 4 endings to the game. Instead of beating the game once and having to play the entire game through 3 more times, you simply continue from the midway point, and each ending brings a little something different to the table. Wow, that game sure was beautifully crafted with both heart-wrenching and heartwarming moments. Conker's Bad Fur Day, however, is the most crude and hilarious experience I've ever had on my Nintendo 64. This game practically defined my childhood. At this point, I'm not sure if I'm trying to review these games or simply state why I like them, so I guess I'm doing a little bit of both. Conker the Squirrel goes out drinking one night, tries to leave the bar, then wakes up in a strange place hungover and shit goes down. Instead of telling you things I love about the game, It really would just be easier to tell you the one thing that I wasn't particularly fond of. The cutscenes of the game are very entertaining, but after the first time of watching them, you get the point. While you can skip them after watching them once, you can't skip them if you start a new game. I can't tell you how many times that I've watched the beginning introduction. I usually just take that time to go eat or something. This game had so much variety in it for a Nintendo 64 game. I think that's why I always preferred it to more popular titles like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie. And before you go all apeshit on me for not being a huge fan of those games, hear me out. Conker's Bad Fur Day lets you go around and collect your money in pretty much any way you wanted with the exception of your typical locked off areas. Super Mario 64 was more of a choose a level, get a star, choose the same level, get another star. Yes, I was waving my head at that part for some particular reason. Which is great if you like if you like seeing the game I will get this eventually. If you like seeing the same level 6 times, I just prefer variety over repetition, and I hate collectathons. My god, do I hate collectathons. This isn't to say that I don't like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, they just aren't my forte. Each mission of the game had something unique to it. You pretty much went from fighting against a robot to swimming in shit within the same 10 minutes. All around, it was just a great, funny game. Where do I even start on this game? A beautifully crafted masterpiece that is way underrated and has the most botched up sequel that I've ever seen. Jade Cocoon is an old PS1 RPG with elements that can only be loosely, and I mean very loosely, compared to Pokemon. And even that is a stretch. You assume the role of Levant, or Levant, depending on something, the son of a cocoon master. After your village is attacked by the minions of the forest known as the Onibubu, you are sent off on your journey to become a Pokemon master. See the similarities? Well, you should. Because there is no such thing as a Pokemon master in this universe. Only cocoon masters. Sorry to you Pokemon fans out there. Your ultimate goal at first is to find a cure for the sleeping illness. But to do so, you must capture minions and raise them to fight for you. You do, however, have the option to have a Nagi Maiden either spin these minions into silk so that you may sell them, or merge the minions to create new, unique minions that share the same abilities and elements. I could go into so much detail in this game that it would become a few videos by itself. So I'll stop here. Just know that there is a lot more to Jade Cocoon than I give it credit for. I will, however, leave it with the most beautiful opening sequence I have ever seen. Everybody that knows anything about myself or my gaming preferences knew that this was going to be number one. But first, let's take a look at some of the games that I left out of this list. I'm not gonna lie, I had trouble deciding whether I liked Castlevania Symphony of the Night or Jade Cocoon more. This was actually sparked by a question someone asked me not too long ago. It was something along the lines of, what game, out of all the games that I've ever played, would I rather have on a deserted island? While Castlevania Symphony of the Night is my favorite game of all time, undoubtedly, Jade Cocoon has more replay value and more variety, and so that was my answer at the time. And I guess it still is. Usually, I like to touch upon the story a bit for my favorite games, if the game even has a story to offer. But let's face it, playing a Castlevania game for the story is like having sex with a hooker for the emotional value. You can try, but you're going to be very disappointed. They tried fixing that with Lords of Shadow, but let's be honest, they only screwed it up more. Anyway, you play as Alucard, Dracula's son, who happens to have his father's name just backwards. You can taste the creativity. Why does Alucard want to kill his father, you might ask? Well, simply, Dracula sucks. And the Belmonts seem to have disappeared. That was a factor. During your adventure, you realize that the true power of the half-vampire Alucard, while getting your hands on hundreds of weapons, armor, and items, as well as relics to grant you powers such as transformations and familiars. Although the game can be completed in about an hour and a half if you just go straight for the ultimate goal of killing Dracula, the real pleasure of the game comes from all of the optional bosses and exploration. On top of these comes the opportunity to play as an additional unlockable character, 2 if you play it on the Sega Saturn version, and what I assume to be the game's hard mode. It's hard to explain why I like the game so much, but to put it into perspective, I've beaten it 40 to 50 times at the very least. And this isn't counting my failed speedrun attempts either. I own it on my PS1, Xbox 360, PSX emulator, and I'm trying to find a Sega Saturn so I can play that version as well. Well guys, this has been a list of my 10 favorite games of all time. Some were obvious choices, while others I really had to consider before giving them a slot on this list. I hope that this is the start of a beautiful relationship between you guys, my audience, and my top 10s. This has been Serivich, and I'll see you guys later.